Hi, today is Monday, November 19th, 2007. My name is Judith Valentine. I am a freshman at Salem State College. I'm majoring in history, and I'm here today interviewing Richard Wright, who is a recent graduate of Salem State, who also majored in history with a concentration in pre-legal history. He is a Marine Corps reservist with a history of active duty experience. Hi, thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
Okay, so my first question is pretty basic. Why did you want to join the military?
Well, after high school, I couldn't see myself getting into, I guess what we call cyclical life, or just going into work, coming home, doing various things. I wanted something that was a little more linear, something you'd be working up for. So I figured the Marine Corps would be a good way to do that and have some options along the way.
Okay. I'd been noticing from your biographical sheet that you have some relatives who had service experience. Do you think that influenced your decision?
Of course, you always hear stories along the way, and it's always about not specifically what periods they served in, because a couple of them were from World War II, one of them was from Vietnam. But you hear about all the background stuff and what it meant to be, with the group of people designated for a goal. So basically it's more about, when it comes to relatives, it's more about how much there was behind the scenes, as much as was in front of it.
Okay, that phrase you used, what it meant to be with that group of people, could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I played hockey for 11 years growing up, and it wasn't always about playing hockey. It's always about, getting along with a group of people and, connecting on a certain level where if you all have a goal, you all see a new side of each other, so that you see how people handle stress and how they handle difficulties. So you get a little more intimate with other people when you're around someone for a long period of time.
Okay, yeah, so the unity of it was important to you.
Of course.
Okay, what kind of work did you do while you were in the Marines?
I was an infantry mortarman. It's infantry being basically the ground forces, the riflemen of the Marine Corps. And then what I did specifically was a mortar, which is a small artillery piece, which is basically a tube that you put a round down. When it hits a firing pin, it fires out.
Okay. What were your expectations like going in, and were they met?
Wasn't really any true expectations, because you never know what to expect when you go in there. Basically, I guess I could say that all the expectations I had were shattered by the first week I was in boot camp. So basically, you learn not to conceptualize after that what you wanted to see, but basically have some primary goals and just absorbing life as it came.
Okay. Well, primary goals. What would have your goals have been?
Mostly, basically, in a macro sense, it'd be basically defending this country, making sure that my brother wouldn't have to. That there'd still always be a choice out there.
Okay. One thing I wanted to talk about was the ads for the military that you see on the TV. They often mention how service is going to shape you for future careers. Now, based on your experience, were any of the skills you learned transferable to everyday life?
General skills, no, but internally you learn to deal with stress a whole lot better. You learn to take on new challenges, be adaptable, and to basically learn more about who you were, in a sense. So it wasn't exactly the marketable skills, but it was stuff you can take for the rest of your life.
Okay. Has it been hard for you transitioning between military and civilian life?
Definitely. Every time you'd go for a drill weekend in the reserves, it'd take about 2 or 3 days to get used to that remilitarization of your life, and then you were gone. So basically all the time that you took to get used to it, you would leave. So yeah, you had to make that adjustment every single month, was to listening to people all the time, to be around people 24 hours a day. It's just a whole new experience. It's not civilian life where you can go home every night.
Okay. I've noticed from your sheet that you attended school at UMass Amherst for a little while, which I know is in a pretty kind of liberal leftist area. So I'm just guessing that you had some contact with people with anti-war, anti-military views. And I was wondering what your thoughts are on people and students with those views.
I think that, with free speech, you always do like to accept everything, except in my particular case, it was that every time you come across people who talk about it as a political sense, they really want to talk about matters in a macro sense, where it's really become more of a bunch of micro issues. Like if you find out that it's not just a global war on terrorism, it's Afghanistan and Iraq, and it's two very different worlds. You find out if you go into one, you start mountain warfare training. If you go to Iraq, then you're going to be training in the desert, maybe even a little bit of the jungle along the Euphrates. So it's really, I like to hear that because the macro issue is something that needs to be discussed. It's out there, of course it needs to be. But for me, that's probably only about half the argument at most.
Okay, so are you saying that maybe they weren't fully informed because of the difference between the larger issue and the smaller one?
Well, I think that's a great thing about having a civilian side and a military side was that people can discuss these larger issues, but those of us in the military have to take on the responsibility of all the small things and all the micro issues. So basically it'd be people who the people who discuss history who aren't actually studying history. They can gloss over things that are maybe in strong debate or things that aren't quite clear to historians. We have to take responsibility for that. Evidence may not be out there specifically for something, but you like to be able to discuss the larger issues.
Yep. Okay. Getting into more of a history, philosophy student background here, do you think war is inherently a part of human nature?
Yeah, I believe that humans are prone to violence just because everywhere you look in nature, there's violence out there, there's a food chain. So I think humans being evolutionary, that they will come to violence every so often.
And but the escalation to war, you do think that is human nature?
I think it is, yeah.
Okay. I'm noticing that you spent some time in Asia while you were in service. Did that travel opportunity, was it helpful to you at all as a student, or how much did you really get to interact with people while you were abroad?
It definitely was, in that it gave you a more global perspective on things and how things are done. Like it's great to see another culture that has a lot of strong religious philosophies elsewhere other than maybe just Christian Judaism. You see a lot of Taoism and Buddhism around. You'd see little Buddha statues along the street. So you basically got to get an own perspective on yourself by living completely immersed in another culture.
You did end up being immersed in the culture, like you did get to interact outside of the military?
For the most part, it was on military base, but every weekend we'd go out into town and partake of it.
That sounds cool. Okay, I've got a two-part question here. First, you already kind of answered this when you told me about what you did in the Marines, being a rifleman. I was wondering what your background with actually working with weapons was like, what you did.
Well, I think the thing I took most from it was learn to make decisions, because when you're handling weapons, people's lives are in your hands. So what you gotta know is that if you ever made a decision, you need to know why you make a decision. And that's something I carry throughout my everyday civilian life, is to know why I made decisions at what point.
Okay, the other part of my question was you listed video games as a hobby of yours, and as a gamer with experience using real weapons and making those decisions, taking it seriously, I was wondering what your perspective is on people who insist video game violence is too lifelike.
Well, there could be an argument for that when you're shooting at it. What they used to tell us in the Marine Corps was that one of the biggest achievements in helping Marines basically cope with combat was building silhouette targets, basically targets that look like humans in a silhouette. And they said that that was one of the biggest advancements in being able to cope and go into combat and to fight effectively.
So some of your training was kind of similar to playing video games?
Of course.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, I've got another morality question. Arguably, there seems to be this kind of cross-culture universal belief that killing is wrong. Therefore, one could make the argument that to engage in a war situation, someone would have to compromise their values. Do you agree with that statement?
Well, I'd agree that the way I've always saw it was that we live in a world of economics where things are going to boil down to somebody's going to get something, somebody's not, and then in turn that's going to lead to violence. So compromising values, I don't think so, in that somebody's values probably should have incorporated violence beforehand. If that comes to them, that's a personal decision.
So if somebody, just to clarify, if somebody believes that violence is wrong in all means, they shouldn't end up in the war situation, was that what you were getting at?
They should take as whatever reasonable means possible to stay away from it. And that there's still, like, it's a voluntary service these days. If you sign up for the military, obviously, you should expect to engage in violence in some way.
Okay, and also you said you expressed the belief that war is fueled by economics. So does that mean that, is that your belief that it always is? Or what do you think of going to war for humanist reasons?
Well, it depends on the humanist reasons, because economics we live in a limited world of limited resources. So even in the most basic things like food, it's going to have to boil down to violence sometimes, just like animals have over the years.
Okay, so that would be the driving force behind what would be listed you would consider to be other reasons. Are economics are still the driving force behind it?
Yes.
Okay. How do you think future generations are going to judge the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan?
I think they would see it. Well, it depends on how far. I don't think the issue of terrorism in the world's ever going to go away. They were telling us that it was eerie, sort of, in boot camp, where this was basically June and July of 2001. This is just prior to September 11th. And they're telling us that, for us, that, conflict was not going to have any clear-cut victory anymore. It was going to be years' worth. That it wasn't going to be World War II anymore. What it was going to end up looking like was the Russians in Chechnya, where they would engage for generations, where Tolstoy is writing about the conflict, and the conflict's still there today, and that there wasn't going to be any clear-cut victory. So in terms of how they're going to judge it, I think they will end up seeing it as a process that's going to go on for generations and won't be just ours. And I don't think it'll be just the Iraq conflict.
Okay. Kind of kills the next one. I was wondering what your thoughts are on leaders like Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, who have acted as commander-in-chief for the military with little or no military experience of their own. And do you think a president can be as effective managing a war if they don't have that personal military experience and that perspective?
I think that the role of president is, it's a number of different jobs, that it's not just like a military thing. So I think the people need to elect who they feel will do the best job at it, and that I think, would it help on the military side? Of course, any experience is going to help you. But I think there's enough advisors and enough people well positioned in the government that the proper decision will be made.
So you have faith in our leaders to accomplish their job then?
Absolutely.
Okay, more morality questions. How would you, in a combat situation, value the lives of American civilians in comparison with enemy civilians?
They value this exact same. Just you never, as per Geneva Convention at least, which would be the minimum for me, it'd just be the same.
Okay. Do your thoughts and beliefs as a student and civilian ever conflict with your thoughts and beliefs as a soldier?
No, I believe that there's always an open forum out there, but there's always the proper channels and the proper times for that open forum. So as a student, I see that it's my job to pursue information and truth as far as I can. In the military, it's the same way, except it's a little more structured in how you do it.
Would you say you have an ethical code that you use as a soldier?
I'd say yes, that basically, well, it'd be the Marine Corps ethos that we all follow as Marines.
Okay, someone who doesn't know much about the Marines, what would that ethos be like?
It'd be to basically follow my commanders and to make the proper decisions when available, and those decisions, depending on the situation, which is extremely complex. You know, it'd be difficult to go through all of them right now.
Okay, how much weight would you have to put on individual decisions? Or, I mean, you listed following your commander first, so don't know how clear I'm being there.
Well, commander's always going to give you an order, and almost all the time there's going to be some leeway and some decision you're going to have to make in pursuit of that. So you've tried to make all your decisions with the commander's intent in mind.
All right. And as far as making those decisions go, does your religious background, obviously being Catholic, that gives you a pretty strict set of moral guidelines there. Would it go hand in hand with the decisions you would make based on your Marine ethos code?
Yes, completely. I haven't run into a situation where I had to challenge either one.
Okay. What are your thoughts on media coverage of military actions?
Well, as long as they're taken with the intent to discover information, that's fine. It's just basically limits to security. Any information that would compromise my Marine Corps brothers, I would not tolerate any information like that. But in terms of generally, I'd love to see truth come out whenever it can. So I have no problem with media coverage as long as it's done with Marine security in mind.
There's been some talk about whether or not journalists should be able to be as close to the military as they have been in the past during conflict situations. What are your thoughts on, civilian journalists going into war zones?
I have no problem with that as long as they accept that, it's a war zone and the realities of it. That's fine.
I wanted to go back to your discussion of the Iraqi war as a process, the war on terrorism as an ongoing process. If there's any more elaborations you wanted to make on that, because I thought that was an interesting point.
It's just that terrorism has been around for a long time. I mean, you go you can go as far back as piracy being a terrorist act. It's something that's always going to be around. I've always felt like violence was the lowest common denominator you can't get away from. So as long as the option's there for violence and someone has no other means, they're going to take that.
Because some people have raised the point that terrorism is simply the new version of what the Cold War was, the communists, because I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase this, America needing a new enemy to go after, to rally and unify the people. That's kind of a cynical look at it, but what are your thoughts on that?
I don't think you ever need to have someone to go against. I think just progress is enough. There's enough enemies to progress in any way that you're never going to need to find someone to rally the troops against, I guess it would be the saying.
Okay. Is there anything you'd like to talk about that I haven't hit upon?
No, just say that basically if I was to say anything that I wanted to get out there was that, you know, as much as a macro issue as it is out there right now, it's so many more micro issues that are involved. And just with anything in life, that the more you know about something, basically every question you answer is going to have two more questions following it, so that there's almost never going to be an answer. There's basically no way to conceptualize how things will turn out in life any more than you can conceptualize this interview.
You've kept using the term micro issues throughout, and I was wondering what you feel some of the micro issues you've encountered are.
Basically, it's logistics, manpower, and the fact that, you know, there's really two major conflicts going on right now that the U.S. is involved in. It's basically, just like I said, if I was to fall down that line, there'd be two questions behind every answer.
Okay. Any advice for future students who would be considering military service?
I think the best advice I could give them would be to basically know what they're getting into, and just like everything in life, make sure you study and know what's going to occur, and basically talk to people who've been there before.
Okay. Well, once again, thank you for coming today.
Thank you.